Before that, let me check just for also for the smooth transition of one presenter to another. Just checking whether the list of presenter that had been listed in this program is here. Miss Nilo is here. Okay. Pimpimol Kwanmani. Did I pronounce it right? Nga. Ngayon, you'll be the one to present? Okay. Dr. Reyes and Dr. Tan. Okay, they are all here except, but I think the second speaker is also here. She informed me earlier. Okay, is the report, the support staff ready? So I'll call the first presenter of the second session. Now, while waiting for others, let me just remind again with regards to some rules that we have to follow. First, each presenter will be given 15 minutes. Reminder, the last 5, 3, and 1 minute and time's up will be raised using the bell. So the first bell means 5 minutes left, then third, then 1. Then if you are not yet finished, then the fourth one means you have to stop. But the first part, I think nobody really used up the 15 minutes. Then after that presentation of 15 minutes, a 5-minute question and answer also will be given to each participant. And again, a reminder, a bell will be ring on the 3 minutes left and 1 minute left and the time's up. Okay, so any questions? By the way, let me also take this opportunity to remind you of the fellowship tonight at 5 o'clock. There will be a coaster that will take the participant from this venue to the social garden, although it's just about 200 to 300 meters. So those who are interested to have some exercise, they can walk, but of course there's a vehicle. Okay, so now let's start. May I call Ms. Pamela C. Nilo, who will be presenting the credit needs of rice farmer households in Tayabas, Quezon, 2015-2016.
Can you still see me? Yes. Okay. Good afternoon to everyone here in this room. Before I actually start, I want to acknowledge my thesis advisor, who pushed me and who taught me to pursue honor and excellence in doing this thesis. So I want to thank you, Dr. Salvador Catelo. However, he's not here in this room. Okay, so I am Pamela Nilo. I'm a graduate of BS Agricultural Economics, and I'm currently working at the Provincial Agricultural Office in Lucena City, Quezon. So today I'm going to present my study entitled Credit Needs of Rice Farmers Households in Tayabas City, Quezon. But before that, I want you to know, or I know that you are all familiar with credit needs, am I right? So the prevalence of these credit needs by farmers particularly gives us a picture that they experience lack of capital. They experience capital insufficiency. So when they are capital constrained, so they cannot fully maximize their available resources. So eventually, they cannot reach the potential yield of their production. And in the long run, thank you, sir. In the long run, this can lead to low production. Okay? So, in order to address this problem, the problem of capital insufficiency, credit has provided a way to meet the requirements for rice and household production, particularly during the time when they are actually waiting for their harvest. Therefore, it is important for us to know when do they need credit and how much credit they actually needed. So as I have mentioned before, they usually suffer from lack of capital. However, rice farmers in Tayaba City, Quezon were found to be still suffering from this same problem despite of all the efforts such as engaging to different income generating activities. So generally this study aimed to evaluate the credit needs of rice farmers production of rice farmers in Tayaba City, Quezon. And specifically, I will give focus on the two specific objectives, which were determination of available capital of rice farmers, and second is the estimation of credit needs of rice farmers. So, to make this research possible, personal interviews were conducted with different rice farmers, wherein the list of rice farmers was obtained from the city agriculture office rather, and for the selection of these respondents, simple random sampling was utilized. The methods of analysis used in this study were descriptive analysis, cost and returns analysis, and the funds flow analysis. So basically, cost and returns analysis was used in order to determine the projected amount of financial capital for both wet and dry season. So we have an assumption here that the financial requirement for the previous cropping seasons was equal to the financial requirement for the next cropping seasons. So next, the funds flow analysis was used to determine the available capital of rice farmers. So the values of net funds flow was equal to the equity capital or available capital of rice farmers. So to give you an overview of the study area, so in 2011, the average yield of Tayabas in terms of rice production was about 3.72 metric tons per hectare. And given the population of 87,000, on 2011, the rice consumption was estimated to be 10,470 per year. However, it's not included in this presentation that there is actually a deficit in the consumption of rice farmers, wherein the supply in this area, in Tayabas, was not enough to meet the requirements given the population at that year. Okay, the results of cost and returns analysis was the total, the projected, let me correct that, the projected capital requirement for the next dry and wet season amounted to 25,353 and 23,209. So later on, I will discuss the credit needs for exclusive for rice production and households credit needs. So there are two credit needs that I'm going to discuss later. Okay, so to substantiate what Sir Bruce Tolentino said earlier, what mostly comprised the financial requirement of farmers is the hard labor. So we can see that in Tayabas, it is also true because 41% of the financial requirement in rice production was mainly comprised by hard labor during wet season as well as during dry season. Okay. So the result of funds flow analysis was presented, and this figure shows the monthly funds flow of rice farmers from November 2015 to October 2016. So, So during the months of December and June, we can see that the net funds flow was at minimum. This is because December and June were usually the months when farmers start rice production. So during those months, they started to acquire farm inputs, they paid the hard labor, and as well as the tractor rent. However, during the months of April and October, these were the months wherein net funds flow was at maximum. Contrarily, these were the months when rice were usually harvested in these months. So this explained why this net funds flow was at maximum during these months. So we can see in this picture that expenses and income occur simultaneously. However, the maximum income and expenditure doesn't occur at the same time. So this explains why deficits occur uh, at different periods. And we have to take note also that at this month, November, December, January, February, May, June, and July, those were the months where deficits actually occur. And to give you an overview of the amount of available capital at the end of cropping seasons, these were the result of also of the funds flow analysis. So at the end of wet season, we have actually a deficit of 1,738. And at the end of slack period, which is during the month of May, we have a deficit of 1,051 pesos. However, at the end of dry season, we have a positive net funds flow, or we have positive available capital amounting to 6,559. So given the financial requirement and the available funds or available capital, we can determine or we can calculate the amount of credit needs exclusive for rice production, which will be further discussed later on. So, credit needs as defined by one of the studies, particularly by Kiring in 2016, it is the amount which farmers need to obtain in order to pay the deficit from household needs. So, from the figure presented earlier, which is the monthly funds flow, we take note of the months where the deficits occur. So, during those months, or the deficit that occurred during those months, were actually the amount of credit that they need in order to suffice the deficits occur at those months. Okay? Okay. So, this is the elaboration of the monthly funds flow presented earlier, and we see that during the months of November to February, then May, June, and July, those are the months when deficits occurred. So, to sum it over, from November to April, there is, okay, so we see that the deficit on these months were actually the amount of credit they needed. Okay, so to sum this all over, during wet season, from November to February, which is wherein the deficits occurred, we have 25,183 pesos amount of credit that they need in order to suffice the expenses on household, rice production, and expenses on other businesses. During May, which is the slack period, we still have a deficit, or we need credit amounting to 1,051 pesos. And since during dry season, the only months where the credit needs occur was during the June and July. So we summed the deficit or the credit needs during June and July. So during dry season, we have a total of 17,664 pesos amount of credit they needed. So as I have mentioned earlier, there are two credit needs. So this one, it was the household credit needs. And the next slide, I will present the credit needs exclusive for rice production. So we assume earlier that the projected capital requirement was equal to the financial or the farm cash cost during the previous cropping season. So we see here that the 25,353 was the projected capital requirement for dry season, and during wet season, 23,209 would be needed in order to finance rice farming operations. So, we see also earlier that at the end of wet season, there is a deficit of 1,738, which will be carried over for the next cropping season. So we have this negative 1,738. And on the previous cropping season, which was presented a while ago, the table that after the monthly funds flow, we have a positive net funds flow at the end of dry season amounting to 6,559. So getting the difference of these two, we calculate the credit needs exclusive for rice production. So, for the next cropping season, particularly during the dry season, farmers would need 27,091 pesos for rice production during dry season, and for wet season, they would need 16,650 pesos. Okay. So earlier, we also discussed that what mainly comprised the financial requirement of farmers was hard labor. So we anticipate that this amount of credit they needed would be more likely to be allocated for hard labor. But it is also a probability that it would be mainly allocated for hard labor. Sorry. And we also anticipated that during dry season or under dry season, only during the months of June and July when farmers needed credit. So we anticipate that this 27,091 pesos is more likely to be occurred on June and July. On the other hand, this 16,650 for wet season is more likely to occur from the months on November to February. Okay. So to summarize it all over, the study evaluated the credit needs wherein we gave focus on determination of available capital and estimation of credit needs. And a pre-tested questionnaire was also executed in order for the researcher to be able to gather data from conducting personal interviews with the rice farmers. And simple random sampling was utilized. Okay, so the capital requirement for dry season, it indicates the actual months that this would occur. This would be on June and October 2017, since I have mentioned earlier that the financial requirement is the projected amount. Okay. So it was found out that during the months of November, December, January, February, and June and July, that households' expenditures would exceed the total income. So these were the months that they would be more likely to demand credit. So, based on the findings, it is recommended that engagement of farmers to other income-generating activities would facilitate rice farmers. However, we see that from the net funds flow or the calculation of funds flow that they are already engaged from different income-generating activities such as income from other farms, non-farm activities, and off-farm activities. So, it is recommended that farmers, particularly their families, their spouse, and their children, would be given also the opportunity or focus to be engaged on more livelihood opportunities in order for them to increase their income. Moreover, it is important for the financial institutions to examine the timing of their funds flow so that their demand for credit would be sufficiently met.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, just some time. Okay. Any questions from the audience? So we'll the first one to later. Let's give first the one because we have only 5 minutes for that. If we have time, I'll call you. From the audience, please. Nobody. Yes.
Hi, Jeanette Madamba from DAME at SEM, UPLB. I'd just like to find out, it seems that every farmer has exactly the same need. Is that it? Like how many farmers did you?
90 rice
90?
farmers.
So
yes.
all of them have exactly the same requirement every month?
No, actually that is the average only.
I see. So when you
Yes.
say average, we're talking of a range of how much for every month. Would you have that information offhand?
However, I cannot present to you the elaboration of the computation, of course, of the credit needs
Yeah,
and,
I
and
understand.
their net funds flow. However, on those 90 rice farmers, there were, I'm sorry, there were non-borrowers and borrowers, wherein mostly of them were borrowers, of course. However, those non-borrowers, it is almost 1 to 3% that they do not have demand for credit or deficit occurred during the said months. However, to answer your question, I cannot present to
It's
you.
okay.
So because
Yeah.
it is clear, it is important for me to clarify also to all the audience that these are actually the range, but I cannot present it to you.
Yeah, yeah.
Ma'am.
I understand. But
Yes
because if
po.
we were going to be like very realistic, kasi, di ba?
Yes.
The thing is, because if you gave, let's say, exactly that
Mm-mm.
amount, no, financing assistance, in some of the farmers, it might be short, and in other cases, it might be like excessive. So ideally, I think, it might be nice to like, really to see like what the range might
Range,
be,
right.
so that
Mm-mm.
when you give the actual financing assistance, then it's like really way within what they really actually need and want. Just one more last question. When you say household expenses, you're talking about consumption, like let's say food.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other expenses aside from
Mm.
that? Did you also include or explore the possibility that they might also be, especially like during a very good, whatever, if there are like requirements for, like, say, they have a big family, if you like relate it also to the size of the family, household expenses can also again vary from farmer to farmer household, right? From farmer household rather to
Yes.
farmer household. So it would be, I think, nice to pry in terms of piecing together, clustering maybe like those who might have family sizes of this much, so that the requirement there would be different. I mean, from
Okay.
the analysis point of view, right? Okay, so just a suggestion. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you, ma'am. However, this household expenses were elaborated on my paper, which I do not include in my presentation. Thank you.
Ray, then the last.
Thank you for the very interesting paper. My interest is how did you measure individual household cash flows? Individual household cash flows. Did you last year did you make them track down their individual household expenses and incomes, or did you make them recall their household expenditure, income, and expenditure during the survey?
So, thank you, sir. When I was making my questionnaire, so it includes the farm income, income from other crops or other farms particularly, of farm activities and non-farm. So we can calculate the total income. However, it also includes I've also asked them, what particular month or months have you engaged to non-farm activities, to farm activities? However, in this household expenses, the breakdown of those components were also asked, like monthly or how much is your electricity consumption, and when was the month that you experienced electricity consumption that was very low. So by that, we can calculate the differences over the given months on their expenditures and income.
The way I understand it, you just made them take note of unusual differences in income and expenditure, right? Say, for example, an unusual expenditure in terms of food. So maybe you'll expect that during fiesta seasons or Christmas, and maybe
Enrollment.
more electricity bills during warm months because of air conditioning system.
Actually, what the interview that I have undergone is so it takes almost an hour or actually in order for them to get the details of their consumption and their income, because it is hard for us to know that if you were going to ask how much is your water consumption, because they will give the usual amount that they incur. However, asking them in the way that they can engage or they can make a story of what happened during those months, we can calculate and we can see the differences on their consumption and income.
Okay. May I ask the faculty also from the they're agribusiness, so they're really one in accounting and of course.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Noreen from DAME. You made mention regarding the groupings of your respondents as well into borrowers and non-borrowers. May I know if you further investigated on which aspects did the borrowers spent the amount they borrowed? Because this would have an implication regarding their future, just in case somebody would grant them credit. If in the case
Credit
that
reversion.
these farmers would borrow money just to pay certain amount to the previous borrowings, then it would lead to loan kiting, which will further aggravate the problems of farmers about the need for financial resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Credit utilization is not covered by my study. However, it is a good researchable area for the future students of our college for them to investigate that. Thank you.
Okay. I think we have Dr. Kilioy. I think but last minute.
Hi, Antonio Quilloy from UPLB, Department of Agricultural
Hi,
and
sir.
Applied Economics. Hi, Pam. Yeah, Pam, can you just explain to us how it was possible for your farmers to have negative net funds flow for several months? How was that possible? Because I cannot reconcile it, reconcile it in my head, how farmers were able to spend so much way above their available cash during a specific period. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Of course, it is very hard for farmers to say that I'm experiencing a shortage right now. I'm experiencing deficit right now. However, okay, so at different months we see that the income or the maximum amount of income incurred by them was not the same with the period that they incurred those high amount of expenses. The same way with the same month, for example, November, there is a deficit in November. So, for example, by November, for the first week of November, they incur expenses on, for example, on the other businesses. So we have these expenses, okay? So we do not assume that they would incur an amount of income immediately from those business. So, for example, piggery. So they spend for feeds on those for their piggery on those week. However, the income for that business would be incurred after several months. So the income, for example, on the next week of November is from selling other vegetables, which is not enough to suffice the expenditures incurred from the other businesses' expenses.
Yeah. Sir, last point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But at the start of the period, for example, you have 100 pesos, and then the farmers would need to spend around 500 pesos. How would that be possible without borrowing money from other sources? So if farmers were able to borrow money from other sources, like the farmer was able to borrow 400 pesos, so the farmer now has a total capital of around 500 pesos. Now, that would match. The expenses and income would match. The point is, if farmers were able to borrow capital from other sources, that should have been counted as funds inflow. There. So my suggestion is for you to check the accounting
Yes.
of all
Diba?
incomes and expenses so that you can have a more accurate, or maybe not accurate, but more realistic figures. Yeah.
Okay, sir.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, sir.
In addition to that, maybe consider like putting up the carryover, the cash from the previous month, so that you will not get a negative balance here. Because I think accountants here, that especially them, will not agree to have a negative funds flow, because they will be questioning where did you get the money.
Maybe
You spend,
that's
right?
the limitation of using funds flow analysis compared to cash flow analysis. So using funds flow analysis, it doesn't involve the beginning and the ending cash balances. However, we can see, using the funds flow analysis, the sources of their funds and the causes of the changes at the end of those periods.
So credit and money is really very interesting. If you'll notice earlier, no money involved, so less question now. There's some money, and especially now that we are borrowing, all of these people are, I think, are very awake when they hear that money. Okay, I think if you have some questions later on, Pam, or there's a address of Pam, you can always address that question later on. Let's give a big hand to Ms. Nila. Okay, so the next speaker, I hope I'll be able to pronounce this correctly. Pimpimol Kwamani.
Right.
Oh my God.
You good?
Okay, we'll be presenting a paper entitled Food Insecurity and Farmers' Adaptation Among Highland Communities in Northern Thailand.
Thank you, sir. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Actually, as a representative of my research team to present the study in Northern Thailand. Our team is 4 people, including Benjapan Ekasing, Prathan Tipkamon, and Nathamon Thiragun from Chiang Mai University, and myself, Pimpimon Kamani from Major University, Chiang Mai, Thailand. So I'm gonna present this in the title of Food Insecurity and Farmers' Adaptation Among Highland Community in Northern Thailand. So I'm gonna follow the conventional outline, starting from introduction and then to telling you why it's important, and then study objective research method, and then just a wrap up for the food insecurity using household expenditure approach and food security model. Then present the result, discussion, conclusion, and recommendation. So let's start from introduction. We found that the slow progress in food insecurity in Thailand is kind of slow, comparing between the benchmark periods since 1990 to 1992 is about 26%, and then it's taken about 16 years, and it's going down to just 10%. So it's just like it's a slow progress. It should be more. And the next reason is we found that 5.5 of Thai people being under nutrition from the Thailand National Statistics Office and Office of Agriculture Economics in 2012, also FAO in 2012 as well. And if you look deeply at the caloric intake for Thai, and if we see the minimum dietary energy requirement, or we call MDER, for Thai is 1,850 kilocalories per person daily. And so we compare between calorie intake and the benchmark MDER. And if it's lower than MDER, we define as insecurity. So we found in the lowland 20%, just 20%, but in the upland and highland it's 45% and 40%. So it's interesting to look, and it's confirmed by Thong Ngam in 2012 that food insecurity in highland can be high as 83%. So from this reason, so we're going to start. We set up the objective of this paper that to review the food insecurity situation in highlands of northern Thailand, and also to investigate factors determining food insecurity. So for the research method, it's about that scenic area that we go. The research site is around northern region, 8 sites at the Highland Development Site operated by the Highland Research and Development Institute, including 4 provinces in northern Thailand, is Tak, Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, and Nan. Have you been before? Okay. So it's up high, and there is a huge right there. So we collect the 908 household data in 2015. Sometimes we need a translation because it even be tied together, but their current, their month, it's whatever. So for in the sense of food insecurity, how we using the household expenditure approach. So if we look at we call daily food expenditure or DFE, and we got a benchmark as the daily minimum requirement. So we call it DFE MDER. So we compare between that. If DFE is greater than the minimum requirement, we define as food security. And if it's less than that, so they food insecurity, all right? And then we calculated in Thai baht. We got, how to use the laser? Okay, we got 49.8 baht per person daily, or calculate to US dollar is $1.39 for the minimum requirement. Okay, and then look at this one, how we calculate it. Look at for the bottom one first. We call it AE, adult equivalent. It is a summation of the average daily energy requirement for the age group and sex. This one is we taken from the Thailand national statistic that they calculated it already, and we multiply by each household member. And then we divided by male adult equivalent energy requirement. So we call it AE. And we took that AE up there. So DFE is from the annual value of rice produced and consumed in household first, and then plus the annual value of other food that produced and consumed in household. Then we plus the annual value of food purchased in household. And then the last one, we also including the wild food that consumed in household as well. And then we divided by 365 days, and then divided by the number of adult equivalent member in household. So then, and then we use the logistic regression to run the food security. That's also including is a functions of socio-economic variable, livelihood access, the participation of the HRDI project. Then it's all, I'm gonna skip this one. So if you're interested in that, could you come to me and talk with this one? We skip to the result part. Okay, we found that the household, 60.8% of households have the adequate income to buy food. 34% sometimes lack income to buy food, and 5.2% lack income to buy food. And we calculate the number of months when household lack income to buy food is about 1.6 months normally. So it's just like and we found they didn't grow any. It's about 18%. I think it's a lot. Because they're uphill, they just go out to the forest and collect the food. And some of them, about 35%, grow vegetable and home garden, and followed by cereal, legume, garlic, and fruit tree. And then, what kind of food that they purchase? We found most of them, majority is 95.9% of, 96%, they buy meat. And following by fruit, sauces and condiment, egg, rice, and outside meal. Okay, the distributions of household, that's percentage of value. So we're asking them like how much food that you buy, that you purchase. We found a majority of them, about 58.5%, they buy food 3/4 of that food, 75%. Yeah. And the reasons for households insufficient food and rice, the first rank is insufficient income. There's about poor. And for the result from the model, we got 2 models. The first model is a factor that important to determine food security were size of households, neighbor quality of life, irrigation water availability. And larger size of household, the higher food insecurity. And 5 size, where household enjoy higher income, had higher level of food security than the rest. Okay. And the second model, we found the significant factor affecting food insecurity were household size, neighbor quality of life is all the same as the first model, but including household income. And households with higher income are less likely to face the food insecurity. Income generating and community development activity are meant to help elevating food insecurity in Highland. And participating in HRDI project not significant to determine the difference in food security. Instead, it's increasing income. So I'm gonna move to how they cope with household strategy to deal with rice insufficient. So they have half of them have adequate rice, but if they not have adequate, what they're dealing with, the first thing that most of them buy rice for consumption. After that is borrow from neighbor or relative, hire labor, or go for donation. And then, what's this about? Okay. In short term, we're asking for short term adaptation strategy and long term. So for the short term, normally what they do, so they borrow money or food, and they collect wild vegetable or product, growing their own vegetable or raising farm animal, and going to work at a labor and have a donation from the relative or neighbor. And for the long-term strategy to cope with the food shortage problem, so they think they're gonna grow more crop and raising more animal and work more and borrowing money. And other areas just like collecting more wild food, finding outside work, changing occupation. So our discussion is about, the result is present in this study review were higher presentations of food insecurity than the level report from the former research. It may be because of 2 reasons. The first one is because the former study, they report the highland among marginal people in northern Thailand. But for our study, we focus only that the highland people. And the second one is our study is maybe overestimation because of we asking them to record them like the whole year expenditure and consumption. So that's why it's hard to recall what they pay and what they eat. So it's just like, we think it's a little bit overestimation. And then food insecurity in Highland people in northern Thailand is found still high. We summarize at the same thing that the former research. So it's just like we affirm that it's high in northern Thailand, especially in Highland. And the conclusion, food insecurity in the study area were found to be vary from 7% to 69%. So it's just quite harsh. And it's found to be depend on income, household size, and neighbor quality of life. The last conclusion is that Although the participation in highland development project itself not found that it's statistically significant to reduce food security, but instead improve income. So we recommend the agricultural research and extension activity in Thailand should be emphasized more in crop livestock productivity improvement, home growth food, and marketing of cash crop. And the second recommendation is go to the social and community development is still need as neighborhood community quality of life, enhancing food security for people through social connection, mutual help, and loan and donation in society. Thank you for your attention.
So now the floor is open for question. Yes, Jim.
Thank you, Pim, for that very wonderful presentation. Now, what really strikes me is one of the independent variables for your logistic regression, which is the
I show
neighbor's
you.
Quality.
quality of life. So I have two questions for that one. One is, what is the justification why you included that variable in the model? And secondly, how did you measure this neighbor's quality of life? What are the parameters?
Actually, it's a lot. So actually, we got a set of questions, and we took in from OECD. So is that I answer you the second question first, all right? So we got the whole set of quality of life and neighborhood quality of life. And so it's a set of questions, and we sum it up. So I'm gonna show where it is. Okay. Wait. The first one is we got dependent variable is a food security, and dependent is a food aspect is a socio-economic variable, livelihood access, and participation HRDI project. It's all.
Why?
Keep back. Could you help?
Yeah. I think conceptually why that's what the question upon why you include that in the model.
I was wondering if this has something to do with social capital. Is that a measure of social capital that could influence the food insecurity of the households? Because if you have, say, neighbors' quality of life, I don't know if you have extended families in Thailand, and you have
This one?
still to the neighbors' quality of life variable.
Quality.
Yeah. So I don't know how it would influence the food insecurity. Why don't you just directly measure the quality of life of the respondent itself, rather than the neighbors? So how would that neighbor influences the food insecurity of another household?
Actually, okay. Because if we increasing, if we increasing the neighborhood quality of life and the atmosphere in the village, because you should know that the research site that we go is a remote area, so it's kind of close. So if the tie and social connection there is strong, so it's gonna help each other to increasing their food security. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So,
I got
okay.
it.
I think we can have one more question. Okay. So, if no more question, then let's give a big hand.
Thank
to
you
the
so
presenter.
much.
Okay. Now let's welcome our third speaker for this session. Ngoyen Tai Duang Nga, who will be presenting a paper entitled Performance of Meat Retailer in Pig Value Chain in Vietnam. That's why she was interested in condition. Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nga I'm teaching at the University of Agriculture in Hanoi, Vietnam. Now, let's go to Vietnam. I'm talking about pig, pork. Just follow the presentation from Les Catelo. Okay. This is our co-author. Now, in the Philippines, you have about half of meat consumed by the Filipino is pork, but in Vietnam it's about 75%. And the meat retailer is important because it's a final channel to supply meat directly to the consumer. And this also related to the health risks beyond the point of the production. Nowadays, the consumer is now more concerned of the food safety, and also the lifestyle of the consumer also change. This is a part of the result from our project about the big risks during along the big value chain. We aim to get a better understanding of performance of the meat retailer along the big value chain and propose some key recommendations to upgrade the big value chain in Vietnam. Our study site is in Nghệ An. This is the center of Vietnam, and in Hưng Yên province here is near Hanoi. The survey from the 74 pork retailer and about 416 household consumer. In Vietnam, pork is mostly sold to the consumer through the wet market. In 2015, we have about 8,600 wet markets in Vietnam. According to the latest statistic, about 61% of the commune in Vietnam has wet markets. The commune is the lowest admin unit in Vietnam. I think it's equivalent to barangay in the Philippines. The pork and meat in general is now distributed also in supermarket and small grocery, but very limited in supermarket, less than 2%, still mostly through the wet market. So this is the general big value chain in Vietnam, in rural area. We have about half of the live pig is consumed in local. It goes through slaughterhouse. Some of them sell directly meat to the consumer, and about two-thirds of them sell to retailer and then go to the consumer. So meat retailer here, some doing both like slaughtering and retailing, and some do just purely retail. Okay, majority of the meat retailer is female, and most of them finish either secondary school or high school, and they have more than 10 years in working experience. Now, in the big value chain, as I mentioned earlier, about nearly half of them do both, like pig slaughter come retailer, and about less than 1/3 of them also raise pig. This is a setup of the meat retailer with some business tool like knife, cutting board, and the others. And the total, the capital for the setting up, sorry, I'm not summing up here, but it's about roughly $1,000. Okay. This is production scale of pork retailer come slaughter. This is really the slaughter man, but usually the husband is the one who slaughter the pig in the morning, and then wife will bring pork to the wet market to sell. So on average, they buy about 34 pigs per month, And in Hưng Yên province, about double that in Nghệ An. Hưng Yên is a province that have a high speed of urbanization and industrialization, so more demand. But the volume of pork selling per day of pork retailer is quite small, around 20 kilogram per day. In some village, it's only 5 kilogram per day. It's very small. So the method of determining selling price of the meat retailer is mostly depending on general prevailing price in the market. For the unsold meat, majority of them take home to eat or give away or change to other method to preserve, like put in the ref for the afternoon or in the next day. Okay. So now is the cost and income. This we calculate for only 100 kilogram of live pig, and this is in Vietnam now. Okay, for the cost, for 100 kilogram of live pig, it costs about around from 3.5 million, around 170 US dollar to 4 million per 100 kilogram. And for that, they add a value of about 300,000 Vietnam dong, about 20 US dollar. And bring about income about 15 US dollar to 18 US dollar for a meat retailer household per day, per 100 kilogram of live pig. So if we calculate for one working day, this bring about 25 US dollar in Hưng Yên province and about 12 US dollar per day in Nghệ An province, because the scale of operation is much higher in Hưng Yên province. And this account for more than 2/3 of the total income of the meat retailer household. Okay. So this is the value added of the slaughter cum retailer in this green, and the retailer in the purple color along the pig value chain in Vietnam. Okay. So assessing the responsiveness of the pig value chain to the consumer demand, we found that about the access of the consumer to the pork, one household can find about 5 places around them to buy pork, so it's quite accessible. About 3/4 of them can buy pork with desired quality. The quality here meaning the freshness. Some consider the free of disease, the residue of antibiotic, and even just the kind of meat that they need. Okay. So we also ask consumer about their trust in the quality, and about 1/4 of them don't trust totally. They never trust in the quality, and they say that the quality of pork in the market is not good enough for them, and they they don't find any implementation of the stamp or something that ensure the food safety for pork in the market. And we asked about the future demand, and if you see this in Vietnam, we think that it's almost reached the level with 62% that they would not change the demand for meat in the coming time, and even one third of them said that they would decrease. I don't know in the Philippines, but in Vietnam now, the trend of consuming pork is not increase anymore. Many people shift to the other, like beef, chicken, and vegetarian. Okay. The consumer gives some recommendation for the government, but majority of them want the local authorities strengthen management and supervision of livestock activity. So in our project, okay. So this is some issue of pork retailer in Vietnam, like you transport in open air like this, okay. Although it's not meet requirement, of course. And you can see the cut, some of the paper here when the meat retailer put the pork in. So this is not hygiene, not meet the requirement of the government. Okay, let me skip this. And this is in rural area, even they put in the ground. Okay. So even not put in the ground, but the practice of putting the paper here is not acceptable by the government requirement. This is better. Okay. We recommend the meat retailer to improve the retailing practice like the transportation and reservation and so on. And the government should enhance the credible meat inspection and of course enforcement of the compliance with the standard. And the government should have a good forecast about the pig or pork demand to reduce market risks for farmer. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so who will ask the first question to Dr. Nga? Oh. So this is why she was interested earlier in the
Yes.
presentation of Prof. Catelo with regards to the food safety of this
Yes.
swine.
Yeah. This is one part of our project output.
Okay.
But the most interesting part is with farmer, slaughterhouse, and the consumer. But we presented all
Mm.
somewhere.
Dr. Nga, I just noticed in your cost and you called it what is family labor income. The retailer bought a live pig, and of course he will sell it in carcass already. But in the cost there, I have not seen, or I just was not able to catch it up. There was no cost of slaughtering it, and also in terms of the reduction of the weight, because a lot of weight, of course, like intestine may not be able to.
Yeah, this is a family labor. They don't hire any labor to do this. So,
Ah.
Yep.
Ah,
Yep.
okay, thank you. Oh, yes, Mr. Yan.
This is just a clarification.
yeah,
You were recommending on meat inspectors,
yes.
meaning there's no established national meat inspection services in Vietnam?
Can I
okay,
answer
okay,
now?
okay.
Yeah.
That's my.
We have a system of veterinary in Vietnam. So in the commune level, we have one veterinary staff working. He or she is responsible for both the treatment of the sick animal and also meat inspection. But because only one per one commune, and he has many activities, so sometimes he cannot, he
Attend
does not
to
do
everything.
this very often.
Okay. So a follow-up question.
Yes, yes.
Will that mean that in one commune, almost all of the residents are raising pigs and they are slaughtering it on their own?
No, not all. For example, in one commune, they can have a 1 to 4 slaughtermen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the other just big farmer.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
Okay, any other questions?
Okay.
Okay, Prof. Catelo. This is not payback.
Yeah. No. I think when you said that
there will be a reduction in the demand for
Yeah.
pig meat.
Yes.
But it's only true for that locality, right? In your two sites,
Yes.
in Nhung and Nguyen, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
it's not true for the entire Vietnam, because when I look at it, it's actually increasing. The projection is actually increasing on a national scale.
Yes. Actually, this is for the rural area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Not for all Vietnam.
Yes.
But we think that in the some rural area and also in the upland area, the meat demand still rising.
Yes, it is.
But in the urban, the other survey show that the demand would not increase for pork.
Yeah, but do you have any reasons why they will decrease? Or is that only a perception or, as choice, but in actual,
Yes.
in reality, they will not really
Yes.
decrease?
In our consumer survey, we also asked for the outside meat consumption. Nowadays, the lifestyle of young people, they go out to eat, and they open up mainly like KFC and McDonald's and other
chicken.
restaurants with the chicken more popular. So it reduced the home consumption of meat and pork as well, especially in the city. But maybe the demand may be still rising because the population is booming.
And we're talking only about the teenagers. I mean, in the
Yeah.
household, there will be other members who will still consume pork fresh
Yes.
from the
Yes,
from the
and
market.
also the Vietnamese now they are very much concerned of the pork quality that related to the antibiotic. That is a very serious problem that they don't choose in the quality.
Yeah, that's also one question.
Yeah, sure. We still have 1 minute.
I personally, as a consumer, would not really be able to detect or
Of course.
distinguish between pork that is contaminated with still antibiotic and
Yeah.
not. So,
Yeah.
in our heads, yes, we don't want that, right? We don't
Yeah,
want
of course.
antibiotic contamination. So, but I cannot really perceive, or I cannot distinctly say that this slice of pork is safe, the other one is not. So,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, of course. As consumer, we cannot detect it. So that in our project, somebody asked us to produce something like toolkit that if you just put in the meat and you can see the level of antibiotics available.
There are tests, yeah, I know
Yeah, a
that.
test
There
kit.
are tests, but as a consumer, we cannot,
Oh.
we cannot
Okay.
say.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we have, yes, you can ask that later on to Dr.
Yeah.
Nga.
Yeah,
Okay, so
is it expensive, ma'am?
Yeah, so,
Okay.
okay, can we give a big round of applause to Dr. Nga? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to express my thanks to organizer
Oh,
to have give your opportunity for me. It's just like coming home.
okay.
I graduated 10 years ago here.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you.
yeah. And also for the information of everybody, she's one of our straight PhD students. She's good. Okay. Okay, so we are running out of time, so let me call the next speaker, Dr. Jane C. Reyes, who will be presenting a paper entitled Institutional Arrangements and Stakeholders' Perception in the Promotion of Labeling of Organic Products in Selected Provinces in the Philippines.
Okay, magandang hapon, good afternoon, salamat suri, sawadika. So I'll be the one who is deviant in the presenters. I'll be more qualitative than quantitative. I'm sure coming from SEM, the best years of my professional life was spent in SEM. And I know my colleagues there are very quantitative. I'm used to stories, being a quali person right now. So in case I will be